Welcome back to Sleepy Science History. Settle in, maybe with a blanket or a warm cup of tea, because tonight we're drifting into a question that feels as old as stargazing itself. Have you ever wondered what it would be like if Earth woke not to one sunrise, but two suns pulling themselves above the horizon, spilling light across oceans, forests, and rooftops at the same time? What kind of world would that be? Would it be twice as beautiful or twice as dangerous? I like to imagine myself standing at the edge of a quiet meadow, dew still clinging to the grass. The first light begins to spread, but instead of a single golden disk, there are two side by side, glowing like a pair of watchful eyes. Would you shield your face in awe, or would you feel a nervousness, as if the sky had become unfamiliar? It's a small shift, really, just one more sun. Yet, isn't it strange how such a simple change could unravel everything we think we know about home? What happens to a planet caught between twin stars? Does it bask in warmth, or does it boil under relentless fire? And if our ancestors had grown up beneath such a sky, would our myths and stories carry twin gods of light instead of one? Let's take this slowly, like a bedtime walk through science and imagination. Because to explore a two-sun Earth is not just about physics, it's about wonder. So let me ask, what's the first thing you think of when you picture two suns? Heat, perhaps? A desert that never cools? That's natural. After all, even one sun can scorch the ground on a summer afternoon. So if we doubled it, wouldn't the Earth just turn into a giant oven? That's the fear, isn't it? But the answer is softer, more complex, like untangling a knot. It depends on the stars themselves. Not all suns are the same. Our star, the one we know so well, is an ordinary yellow dwarf. Warm, steady, generous with its light. But stars can be bigger, smaller, cooler, or hotter. If our second sun were smaller, dimmer, say, a red dwarf, it might not blind the sky with heat. Instead, it could stretch twilight into something longer, more mysterious. Can you picture evenings where the first sun dips low, and just as you think night is falling, the second sun lingers, painting the world in slow-burn copper light? How strange it would feel never to know real darkness. Would fireflies exist if shadows never grew deep enough for them to glow? And then what about orbits? Gravity is a tricky thing. Two stars tugging at Earth. Would we dance smoothly between them, or wobble like a plate set on the edge of a table? Astronomers tell us that in many cases, it would depend on how far apart the suns are. If they're close together, almost hugging in the sky, Earth might just orbit them both, circling like a loyal pet around a pair of companions. If they're farther apart, though, the pull could tear our path into something wild, swinging us closer and farther, bringing summers of fire and winters of ice. Could you imagine growing up never knowing if spring would arrive? Or if instead, you'd find yourself in a deep freeze? Life adapts, though, doesn't it? Plants would need new tricks. Maybe silver leaves that bounce away excess light, or thick, waxy skins that hold water for dry, double-lit days. Would trees grow differently, their branches reaching toward two sources at once, twisting into strange, elegant shapes? And what about sleep? Would you rest well if the sky never truly darkened? Perhaps we would learn to nap like cats, catching rest in pockets of shadow, instead of closing our eyes for long, dark nights. Let me pause and ask you something. Would you like that? A life where the sun never fully leaves, where the world glows endlessly, always tinged with a hint of daylight? Some might find it comforting, never being swallowed by night. Others might long for stars, hidden behind the endless glow. Without real darkness, how would we ever notice the Milky Way stretching above us, or tell stories about constellations? Would we miss them, or would we never know what we were missing? Civilizations, of course, would notice the two suns immediately. Imagine the first humans gazing up at the sky, not puzzled by a single glowing disk, but by two. Would one become the greater sun, the leader, the giver of crops? Would the other be seen as its sibling, or its rival? Maybe whole cultures would build temples with two entrances, aligned to catch the light of each sun on special days. Maybe our calendars would not be 12 months, but something more complicated, cycles woven around the crossing patterns of dual dawns. And holidays. I can almost hear the festivals. People gathering in fields to honor the rare moment when both suns rise together, side by side, blazing like twin torches. But here's another question. What would happen to our oceans? Tides are pulled by the moon, yes, but sunlight fuels winds, storms, currents. With two suns, weather would be restless. Clouds might never have time to gather before burning away. Or perhaps, in certain places, constant heating would drive endless winds, spiraling into tempests stronger than anything we've known. Could we live with skies that always roared, seas that always churned? Or would we adapt, building cities not by the shore, but deep inland in calmer belts of climate? It's tempting to think a double sun would doom us. But nature is inventive. Just look at the universe. Binary stars are common. In fact, many planets we've discovered around other stars orbit two suns. And some of those worlds might even be habitable. So maybe Earth could thrive too. Perhaps life here would just be different. Imagine birds with dazzling feathers designed to reflect twin glows, or flowers that open not at dawn, but when the balance of both suns dips low enough to invite a softer light. Wouldn't that be something to see? And what about you? Would you still write poetry to the sky? Would you sing songs about two lights? Or would one always be your favorite? Maybe the smaller, gentler one, the one that lingers, would earn your love. Maybe humanity would split into two camps, those who worship the first fiery sun, and those who cherish the second patient one. Conflict or harmony, myth or science, it would all be shaped by the sky above. I like to think about the evenings most of all. Right now, on our Earth, twilight feels like an exhale. The sun leaving, shadows lengthening, colors fading. But on a two-sun Earth, twilight might stretch and stretch, a painting that never dries. The first sun dips, but the second lingers. And when it finally follows, maybe the first has already looped back around, ready to rise again. Can you picture a world where night never truly falls, but only hides in narrow slivers between overlapping suns? Would dreams feel the same without the comfort of darkness? There's something both comforting and haunting about that thought. Comforting, because light means safety, no predators lurking in pitch-black forests. Haunting, because without night, where do we rest? Where do we find silence? Darkness, after all, is a kind of medicine, a balm for the mind. Without it, would we ever really sleep deeply? Or would we become a restless species, always half awake, never surrendering to dreams? And dreams, how important they are. Would a child beneath two suns still dream of flying? Of stars? Would they even know the word star? If no night revealed them, the universe itself might be hidden from them, wrapped behind twin veils of light. How long, then, before someone somewhere wondered what else lay beyond their double sky? So much of who we are is tied to the rhythms of day and night. With two suns, those rhythms would unravel, and something new would take their place. Would we find balance, or would we always feel slightly offbeat, like a song played on a tilted record? I can't say for sure, but that's the beauty of questions like this. They remind us how fragile and how marvelous our own little world truly is. So, let's linger here for a moment, beneath our imagined twin dawns. Picture the grass beneath your feet, the warmth brushing your skin, two shadows stretching behind you in different directions. Does it feel overwhelming or strangely peaceful? The truth is, no answer is final. Science gives us possibilities, but wonder fills in the spaces between. And as we close this first chapter, I'll leave you with a gentle thought. If Earth had two suns, maybe we wouldn't call it day and night. Maybe we'd live in something else entirely, a world of eternal turning light, a cycle we can't yet imagine. Would that make us stronger, wiser, or simply more grateful for the single sun we know so well? That's the question I'll leave in your hands tonight. What would a shadow look like under two suns? Would it split into two, stretching in different directions, like twin ghosts walking beside you? Or would the shadows overlap, darkening one another, creating strange patterns on the ground that shift with every step you take? I find myself imagining a child playing outside in such a world, trying to step only within one shadow while the other slips away, dancing across the grass. Can you picture how confusing it would be? Never just one clear outline of yourself, but always two. Would it make you feel multiplied, as though you were never entirely whole? Or perhaps it would feel like company, as though you were never truly alone. Shadows are more than just absence of light. They are markers of time. On our Earth, sundials told the hours by the slow crawl of a single shadow. But with two suns, what then? Would we have double sundials, one shadow cutting across the other, creating a strange geometry of time? Could time itself be measured the same way? Or would we need to invent something new, something uniquely shaped for a sky that never settles on one direction of light? And seasons, how would they play out beneath two suns? You know how one sun already tips our planet into cycles of winter and summer, tilting us toward warmth and then away. But what if there were two? If one star pulled us into its heat just as the other began to fade, would our winters shrink until they barely existed? Or would the competing rhythms leave us with wild extremes, burning summers followed by icebound years, depending on how their gravitational tug aligned? Imagine farming under that sky. Would crops even know when to grow? On our Earth, plants lean into the cycle of light and dark, measuring days, measuring seasons. But under twin suns, would they be confused? Or would they become cleverer than we can imagine? Sprouting when one sun strengthens, resting when both blaze too fiercely, thriving in a dance more complicated than any calendar we could design? And here's a gentler thought. What about rain? We know sunlight drives the whole rhythm of weather, warming oceans, pulling water skyward, building clouds that later fall as rain. With two suns, the oceans might never rest, their surfaces constantly trembling under heat. Would clouds swell endlessly, pouring rain so often that whole forests drowned? Or would the opposite happen? Sunlight burning the air so hot that clouds never formed at all, leaving deserts in place of rivers? Do you feel the unease in that question? The way life itself bends at the mercy of distant fire? But then again, nature is rarely fragile in the long run. If rains grew constant, perhaps life would weave itself into watery jungles, endless wetlands teeming with creatures that never dry. If deserts spread, maybe life would adapt with armor-like skins, silver leaves gleaming like mirrors, conserving every drop. Do you think we might learn from them, designing homes and clothing that shimmered, reflecting light away, turning danger into balance? And speaking of balance, what about the moon? Our quiet companion, circling us faithfully, drawing tides, glowing gently in night. Would it shine the same way with two suns? Or would it vanish, its soft glow drowned beneath the endless blaze? Could you imagine never seeing a full moon again, never feeling its silvery pull? What poems would be lost? What songs would never be sung? Without the moonlight, would we even know what longing feels like, the longing tied to shadows, to cycles, to something that grows and fades? There is another mystery here. How would sleep feel? Darkness has always been our cue to rest. Tells our bodies now is the time to slow, to dream. But under two suns, when darkness hides itself in fleeting slivers, would we ever sleep fully? Or would we drift into half-sleep, always stirred by lingering light, always restless? Would dreams shrink, crowded out by wakefulness? Or would they bloom stranger than ever, colored by a sky that never rests? And if humanity itself never truly slept, what kind of culture would emerge? Imagine cities alive at all hours, work and play blending without pause. Imagine musicians who never wait for evening, artists who paint always under a steady glow, builders who hammer through what we once called night. Would we thrive in that endless energy, or would we burn ourselves out, never learning the wisdom of stopping, of silence? I wonder too about children in such a world. A child lying in bed, eyelids heavy, yet golden light still seeps through the window. Would bedtime stories even make sense? If the sky refused to dim, would parents invent tales not about nightfall, but about the rare hours of shadow when both suns dipped low at once? Perhaps those brief shadows would become sacred, moments when the world was hushed, stars flickering faintly into view before being swallowed again. Can you imagine how precious those minutes would feel? Would you go outside just to stand in it, to breathe in darkness like a gift? Now think of the stars themselves. On our Earth, we are lucky. We have nights so deep that the whole Milky Way spills above us, ancient and vast. But under two suns, the stars might vanish, hidden by constant glow. Would humanity ever even know the universe beyond? Would we believe the sky ended just above our heads, never guessing at galaxies beyond? Would our science grow slower, more inward-looking because the heavens were veiled? Or perhaps, here is a beautiful thought, our curiosity would become even sharper. If stars only revealed themselves in rare moments of overlapping night, maybe we would treasure those glimpses so much that we studied them with relentless care. A fleeting glimpse of another world might inspire more wonder than a sky we take for granted each evening. Do you see how scarcity can deepen appreciation? Sometimes what is rare teaches us the most. And then there is love. Would romance feel different under twin suns? Lovers walking hand in hand, not beneath a soft moon, but under two blazing lights, their shadows tangling and doubling on the ground. Would poets write not about longing for night, but about the comfort of endless day? Or would they mourn it, yearning for mystery, for darkness in which secrets can be whispered? What do you think? Would you fall in love differently beneath such a sky? The mind keeps circling back to rituals. Fire, for instance. How strange would it feel to light a fire when the world already glows twice as bright? Would fire still comfort us? Or would it feel pale beside the suns? Would our ancestors have discovered it at all, if daylight was never short enough to demand it? Fire gave us warmth, stories, civilization. But in a world without true night, maybe the spark of civilization would have been delayed. Maybe we would still be wanderers, content to live in endless light, never chasing shadows, never hungering for stars. And here lies a quiet paradox. Too much light might keep us from seeking knowledge. Our curiosity has always been born of contrast, light and dark, known and unknown. Would endless brightness soothe us into complacency? Or would it sharpen us, pushing us to seek the hidden truths behind the glare? One more question lingers. How would we mark the passage of time? Here, we lean on sunrise and sunset, on the predictability of dark and light. But on a world with two suns, those cycles would be tangled. Days could stretch endlessly or break into fragments. Would we measure time by the crossing of shadows, or by the brief hours when both suns left us? Could time feel slippery, almost dreamlike? Would we lose our grip on hours and days, and live instead in a blur, guided not by clocks but by instinct? And maybe, just maybe, that blur would bring a kind of peace. Without clear nights and days, without rigid lines between work and rest, perhaps we would drift more gently, more slowly. Would stress even exist in the same way, if life unfolded like a long twilight? Would we become more patient, more accepting of uncertainty? Or would the opposite happen, with chaos replacing order, and restlessness gnawing at us endlessly? These are the questions that rise when we step into the imagined shadows of a two-sun world. Each answer branches into another question, like paths in a forest that never ends. And perhaps that's the point, not to solve every mystery, but to wander in them. Because what is science, if not curiosity? And what is curiosity, if not a kind of shadow, something that forms where light does not reach? In a two-sun world, even shadows are doubled, multiplied, endlessly shifting. Maybe that is what such a world would teach us. That answers are never singular, that truths overlap, that life itself thrives in the space between lights. And as you picture those two suns setting in opposite corners of the horizon, shadows lengthening in strange directions, ask yourself one last thing. If you stood there in the glow of fading light, which shadow would you follow, your own, or the one cast by the other sun? What would it feel like to live on a planet tugged between two suns? Would you sense it in your bones, like a gentle rocking underfoot? Or would the pull be invisible, shaping your world in ways you never noticed but always lived within? Gravity is a quiet sculptor. It holds oceans in their bowls, pulls rain back to the ground, keeps your feet steady as you walk across the earth. But with two suns, gravity would no longer be a single, steady hand. It would be a duet, two invisible partners guiding the same dance. Do you imagine that duet would be graceful, balanced like a waltz? Or would it be clumsy, a constant tug of war, pulling the planet this way and that, never letting it rest? Think for a moment about our own orbit. One sun, one predictable path, a neat ellipse that repeats year after year. The seasons rise and fall like the rhythm of a heartbeat. But now add a second sun. Where does the planet go? Does it swing in looping figure eights, twisting around both stars like a child caught between two parents' hands? Or does it find a stable path, circling them both at once, like a moth circling a pair of lanterns tied together? Astronomers tell us there are many possible arrangements. Some worlds orbit both stars together, as though the suns themselves were partners bound tightly, spinning around a shared center, while the planet circles at a distance. Others cling to just one star, with the second sun watching from afar, tugging occasionally, like a mischievous sibling disturbing the balance. Which of these do you think Earth would belong to? Which would feel more natural, being loyal to one sun, or embracing both at once? But imagine the skies. If Earth orbited both suns together, we might see them rise as a pair, close companions in the dawn, setting together in twin arcs of gold. How steady and reassuring that would be, like two guardians watching over us. Yet if Earth orbited one star while the other drifted farther away, the second might appear as a rival sun, rising at odd hours, cutting across the sky like a rogue fire. Would that feel unsettling? Never knowing when the second sun might appear, shifting the light of day in unpredictable ways? And what would the tides become under such gravity? We know the moon pulls them, swelling oceans back and forth. But the suns, too, have their say. Two stars tugging at Earth would mean oceans rising higher, falling lower, restless and dramatic. Could we even build harbors in such a world? Or would ships forever chase tides that refuse to be predictable? Picture coastal towns built on stilts, their docks reaching far into the sea, always ready for water that might climb unexpectedly. Would human life be drawn inland, seeking refuge from seas that never sat still? The land itself would feel the sun's pull. Earth's crust might shift more often, plates grinding, volcanoes rising. Do you think we would accept earthquakes as ordinary, as common as rainfall? Would civilizations grow in places where the land cracked often? Or would we learn to float our cities above the earth, drifting on seas instead of clinging to shaking ground? And here is another quiet question. How would we mark distance? On our Earth, the sun gives us a sense of center. It is the heart we orbit. But with two, where is the center? Do we think of ourselves orbiting one, or both, or something in between? Would maps of the universe look different? Every chart of the sky drawn with not one anchor but two? And would that change how we thought of ourselves, not as children of a single star, but as citizens of a system with twin parents? Consider for a moment how mythology might have shaped itself. Gravity is unseen, yet its influence is everywhere. Might ancient people have told stories of two rival gods, endlessly tugging at the world, their quarrels shaping mountains and seas? Or would they imagine them as lovers, their pull creating harmony, keeping Earth safe between them? Which feels truer to you, that existence would be a battle or a balance? And what about the human body? We are creatures grown under one steady sun, one stable orbit. But under shifting pulls, would our bodies feel different? Perhaps bones would be stronger, built to withstand changes in force. Perhaps our sense of balance would sharpen, attuned to tiny variations. Do you think you would notice it walking across the ground as gravity thickened and lightened like the tide? Or would it be subtle, something you never realized was unusual until you imagined a world with only one sun? I think often about the sky, not just its light but its motion. On a two-sun Earth, the stars themselves would seem to drift differently, constellations twisting in ways that never repeated. Would navigation be impossible? Sailors once guided themselves by the steady North Star. But what if the heavens refused to stay still, their patterns disrupted by the gravitational dance of twin suns? Would exploration still flourish, or would we remain more bound to land, fearful of seas without certain guides? And yet, unpredictability has always stirred curiosity. If the sky bent and shifted, maybe we would become even keener observers, charting every variation, inventing more complex mathematics far earlier in history. Perhaps our science would have leapt ahead, driven by necessity. Would Newton have been born centuries earlier, urged by the mystery of a world whose gravity played double notes instead of one? Now let us think of orbits beyond ours. Planets might share the system, caught in elaborate dances between the stars. Can you imagine looking up at twilight and seeing not just the moon, but other worlds gleaming brighter than ours does now? Neighbors illuminated by two suns, glowing in strange hues of silver and red? Would we long for them more fiercely, dreaming of traveling across the cosmic dance floor? And what of the suns themselves? If they orbited closely, they might tug at each other, flaring, shedding fire into space. Would Earth sometimes be bathed not just in light, but in storms of radiation, surges of brilliance sweeping across the sky? Would we live in fear of sudden days when the suns burned too fiercely? Or would we build shelters that glowed like caves of safety, learning to weather storms of light the way we now weather rain? Do you notice how every question multiplies? That is the nature of twin suns. Duality invites possibility. One path branches into two, two into four, each answer leading not to certainty but to wonder. And maybe that is the deeper truth. A world with two suns would not simply be brighter, or hotter, or harsher. It would be more complex, layered, filled with choices and contradictions. Let me ask you something personal. If you lived beneath two suns, would you feel safer, as if the universe had given you double guardians? Or would you feel exposed, always watched, never allowed to rest in true night? Would you love them both equally, or favor one, secretly wishing the other would fade? What does your heart tell you? And think of children once more, for they always inherit the questions of their skies. A child looking up, tracing two paths of light across the heavens. What kind of imagination would that spark? Would they dream not of one future, but always two, lives branching in parallel, never singular? Perhaps even our very sense of identity would be shaped by such skies. Perhaps we would all carry within us a feeling of duality, of multiplicity, as natural as breathing. The dance of gravity is silent, but it is never still. On Earth as we know it, it guides our days and nights with steady rhythm. But on a two-sun Earth, the dance would be richer, stranger, sometimes chaotic, sometimes harmonious. Would you call that frightening or beautiful? Perhaps both, depending on the day. And as you imagine standing on such a world, the ground beneath you shifting subtly under twin pulls, the sky above shifting in arcs and loops, ask yourself this. Is it not possible that uncertainty itself could become a kind of stability? That in learning to live between two suns, we might learn not to cling to balance, but to dance with imbalance, to find peace in motion itself. That, I think, is the quiet lesson of a two-sun Earth. Not that life would be impossible, but that life would be different, shaped by the tug of two stars, guided by questions that never settle into final answers. And maybe, in that endless questioning, we would find a deeper kind of wonder. What color would the sky be if two suns poured their light upon it? Would it still glow with the familiar blue of afternoon, or would the air shimmer with stranger hues, greens, violets, silvers, shades we do not yet have words for? Close your eyes and imagine it. Not one dawn, but two. The first sun rises, painting the horizon in pale gold. Then the second follows, its light mingling with the first. Do the colors blend seamlessly, or do they clash, staining the sky with unexpected contrasts? Would mornings feel like a canvas brushed twice, layers of light crossing over each other, never the same as the day before? Think about shadows in this doubled world. On our Earth, shadows deepen as the sun climbs, dark against brightness. But with two suns, how do shadows behave? Perhaps one is faint, the other sharp, their lines overlapping, making a latticework of shade. Would forests shimmer with patterned darkness, trunks casting twin silhouettes, branches weaving webs of shifting light? Could you walk through a garden and see yourself stretched twice, your twin shadows walking beside you, never quite aligned? Would it feel eerie or enchanting? And what of the colors in those shadows? We call them dark, but shadows are never truly black. They carry the color of the light that surrounds them. Two suns, each with its own hue, would make shadows alive with subtle tints, red, gold, even violet. Can you imagine sitting under a tree, watching the ground beneath it ripple not just with shade, but with colors sliding like water? Would artists find themselves overwhelmed, unable to capture such richness, or inspired beyond measure, painting skies more vivid than anything we know today? Now consider the plants. Under one sun, leaves appear green because they reflect the parts of light they do not use. But under two, would that rule hold? What if one sun poured out more red light and the other more blue? Would plants evolve new pigments, leaves flashing silver, copper, or deep violet, tuned to drink from both fires at once? How strange would it be to walk through a forest of shining metallic leaves, the trees glittering as though made of treasure? Would you feel as though you had stepped into a dream? Or would such a sight become ordinary, as familiar as green grass is to us? And what about animals? Fur, feathers, and skin are all painted by light. If two suns filled the sky, creatures might need to adapt. Perhaps they would gleam with iridescence, scales catching one sun in gold and the other in silver, dazzling with each movement. Perhaps eyes would change too, capable of seeing colors beyond human reach, able to read signals hidden in the blended light. Would we look dull to them, our skin flat and plain? Or would they find us strange and fascinating, creatures of a single-colored past? Think of the oceans. When sunlight touches water, it scatters into blues and greens, painting the sea with depth. But under two suns, how would the waves look? Would they sparkle twice as bright, or shift to colors unseen? Pearls glowing pink at dawn, aquamarine seas melting into violet at dusk? Could the ocean's surface become a mirror, splitting the light into dazzling fragments, too brilliant to gaze at for long? And what creatures would swim beneath? Would they evolve shimmering bodies to hide among the colors, or glow themselves, rivaling the brilliance above? Even the sky at night would change. Or rather, would night exist at all? If one sun dipped, the other might linger. Stars would retreat shy against the twin radiance. But in rare hours when both slipped below the horizon, what would we see? Perhaps the heavens would reveal themselves only briefly, a sudden shower of stars before being swallowed again by light. Would such scarcity make them more sacred? Would we gather as families, whole villages, just to glimpse the stars for a few precious minutes? And if the stars rarely appeared, would our sense of the universe shrink? Would we still dream of space, of galaxies beyond our own? Or would we imagine ourselves as the center, content with two suns, never yearning for the infinite beyond? Would curiosity fade, or would it grow sharper, hungrier, fueled by the rarity of those fleeting nights? There is also the question of beauty. What is beauty but the meeting of light and perception? If two suns transformed every color, would our sense of beauty transform as well? Maybe we would not admire the same flowers, the same skies. Maybe our art would be filled with metallic forests, oceans glowing in twin shades, faces painted by double shadows. Would love poems describe not the light in someone's eyes, but the way their gaze shifted between two suns, glowing first gold, then silver? And how would architecture respond? Imagine a temple designed not for one beam of sunlight, but two. Windows angled to catch the rising of both stars. Pillars aligned so shadows cross in perfect symmetry. Could you walk through such a place at noon and feel as though the building itself was alive, its stones breathing with light? Would cities be built in spirals, domes, and towers that captured every shifting shade, glowing like jewels under the sky? But not all would be wonder. Too much light can blind. Deserts might expand under relentless brightness, their sands reflecting heat until they burned the air. Could human eyes even bear such brilliance? Would we wrap our faces in cloth, wear veils and mirrors just to walk outside? Or would evolution itself reshape us, gifting us new eyes, wider, sharper, shaded to survive the flood of light? And here is another question. Would darkness become a luxury? If both suns left the sky only rarely, would people build caves and sanctuaries, not to escape predators or storms, but to escape brightness? Would rest itself become a ritual, practiced in carved-out hollows where shadows could finally breathe? Can you imagine paying tribute to darkness, treasuring it as we now treasure gold? I wonder, too, about fire. On our Earth, fire glows fiercely against the night. It was our first technology, our first comfort. But in a world never far from light, would fire hold the same meaning? Would it be discovered at all, or would it feel redundant, pale beside the suns? And if fire were not sacred, if night were not long and fearful, would humanity's path unfold differently? Would stories be told not around flickering flames, but beneath endless daylight, rituals unfolding under skies that never dimmed? And yet, even in such brilliance, I think mystery would endure. Light does not erase wonder, it changes it. Perhaps philosophers would write not of darkness and dawn, but of color itself, of the way two suns blend and twist the world into endless hues. Perhaps artists would seek to capture moments when shadows crossed, when one sun hid behind the other, creating eclipses stranger than anything we know. Let us pause here and picture an eclipse. What would it look like with two suns? Would they ever pass before one another, one veiling the other in sudden brilliance? Imagine standing on a hill as the sky darkened, not into night, but into a surreal twilight painted by overlapping light. Rings of fire might blaze, shadows twisting into patterns never before seen. Would such moments become holy, guiding calendars, shaping rituals, filling myths with tales of union and rivalry between the twin lights? And how would you feel standing there watching one sun slide before the other? Would you feel awe or fear, or both at once? Would you think of balance, two mighty fires weaving into one, or of fragility, knowing how easily harmony might shatter? Even questions of identity change beneath two suns. On our Earth, we speak of sunrise and sunset as universal. But in such a world, which sun would we mean? Would languages develop separate words, perhaps even separate calendars, one tied to each light? Would whole cultures form around one sun, seeing it as theirs, dismissing the other as belonging to rivals? Could wars be fought not over land, but over loyalty to a star? Or would unity emerge, with both suns honored equally, a symbol of balance, duality, and coexistence? Would our flags show twin circles, our prayers spoken to two skies? Which path do you think humanity would choose? Perhaps the answer lies not in fear, but in adaptation. Life finds a way to thrive in every corner of light. If the colors of the world changed, so too would we, our eyes, our stories, our very sense of beauty. We would not mourn the green of leaves or the silver of the moon, because we would never have known them. Instead, we would cherish forests of copper, oceans of violet, cities built of glass to catch the endless glow. So I ask you, if you woke tomorrow beneath two suns, would you long for the single light you once knew? Or would you surrender to the new brilliance, letting it reshape how you saw the world? Perhaps that is the quiet truth hidden in this thought experiment. The universe does not ask if we are ready. It shines, it pulls, it paints, and life adjusts. We are not separate from it, we are threads in its woven light. And whether one sun or two, we will always find ways to see beauty, to make meaning, to dream under whatever sky we are given. And maybe, just maybe, two suns would not overwhelm us at all. Perhaps they would teach us something we too often forget, that the world is never one color, never one truth, never one path. It is always a blending, a meeting of lights, a dance of shadows. Wouldn't you agree? What does time mean if the sky never truly goes dark? Would the hours slip past unnoticed, blending into one long stream of light? Or would we invent new rituals, new ways of marking the passage, when sunrise and sunset no longer serve as faithful guides? Think about how much of our life is tied to the rhythm of light and dark. We wake with the sun, rest with the night. Our ancestors planted and harvested by its cycles, prayed to its rising, feared its setting. But what happens when there are two suns, their cycles overlapping and colliding, sometimes lengthening the day, sometimes breaking it into fragments? Would we still think of time as we do now, measured, ordered, or would it feel more fluid, less certain, more like a river that bends and wanders? Imagine standing in a village beneath such a sky. The first sun sinks toward the horizon, painting the fields in soft gold. Children run to their homes, expecting night to follow. But then the second sun lingers, stubborn and bright, stretching the day far longer than anyone expected. Would the children sigh with disappointment, restless in the too long light? Would parents scold them gently, saying, "Sleep anyway," even though the world is not ready for it? Sleep itself would become a question. Without regular darkness, would we still rest in long stretches, or would we learn to sleep in smaller pieces, naps scattered through the day? Could society adapt to a world where no one sleeps at the same time, where rest is as scattered and overlapping as the suns above? Would it make us more flexible, more creative, or endlessly restless? Think about dreams. Do you believe dreams need darkness? Or would they come all the same, summoned not by night but by the closing of our eyes? Perhaps in a world of two suns, dreams would become shorter, stranger, flickering like sparks instead of flowing like rivers. Would we miss the deep, drifting dreams we know now, or would we accept the new kind, adapting our stories and myths to fit them? Calendars, too, would change. We measure months by the moon, years by the sun. But with two, how would we count? Perhaps one sun would set the rhythm of farming, the other the rhythm of worship. Perhaps we would weave two calendars together, a fabric of overlapping cycles, more complex than anything we know today. Can you imagine the festivals? One celebrating the crossing of shadows, another marking the rare moment when both suns set together? Would people gather in awe for those fleeting minutes of true night, savoring the stars as though they were miracles? And what of work? Would there even be such a thing as working hours in a world of endless daylight? Or would life become continuous, tasks flowing one into another, without the sharp breaks we know as day and night? Factories might never close, markets might never sleep. Would that make societies more productive or more weary, drained by the absence of pause? I wonder what poetry would look like. On our earth, poets have always spoken of dawn as a beginning, dusk as an ending, night as a mystery. But what if those boundaries blurred? Would poems still describe time in cycles, or would they describe it as endless, unbroken? Would metaphors shift, lovers compared not to the moonlight, but to the way one sun softens when the other begins to rise? Would we long for endings, just so beginnings could feel real? And here is another thought. Would darkness itself become precious? If true night came only in rare moments when both suns dipped below the horizon, would we treat it as sacred? Imagine families gathering in silence during those short hours, watching the stars together. Would storytellers come alive then, weaving tales that only made sense in shadow? Would whole cultures rise around honoring the dark, protecting it, preserving it as something holy? There is also the question of health. Our bodies follow circadian rhythms, guided by the sun. Two suns would confuse those signals. Would we become a species with fractured rhythms, some people tuned to one sun, others to the other? Would society split, divided not by geography but by allegiance to light? Perhaps one group would rise with the first sun, calling themselves the children of dawn, while another would align with the second, the keepers of dusk. Can you imagine the rivalries or the unity that could grow from such divisions? But maybe we would adapt in ways we cannot yet imagine. Evolution does not stop at confusion. Perhaps we would develop inner clocks no longer dependent on darkness, but on subtler cues, the tilt of shadows, the blending of colors in the sky. Maybe our minds would learn to feel time as instinctively as we feel hunger or thirst. Wouldn't that be remarkable, to carry time not in clocks or calendars, but in the quiet rhythm of the body? And what of aging? Would we still mark birthdays if days and nights could not be counted so easily? Or would we measure age in seasons, in cycles of the suns, in the rare moments when both vanish together? How would that change the way we thought of our lives, not in years but in lights? I think of storytellers again. On our earth, myths were often born of cycles. Persephone descending into the underworld each winter, the sun god riding across the sky each day. What myths would grow in a two-sun world? Perhaps one sun would be called the protector, the other the wanderer. Perhaps they would be siblings or rivals, or lovers forever circling each other. And every culture would explain time differently, not as a straight path, but as a weaving of two forces forever intertwined. Do you feel the weight of that? How even our deepest sense of being, our relationship to time itself, would bend under a sky of two suns? Would we become more patient, accustomed to irregular rhythms, or more anxious, always uncertain of when to rest, when to rise, when to pause? And what about you? If you lived under such a sky, would you fight for structure, carving strict hours to bring order to chaos? Or would you let go, drifting with the suns, living as time itself wove and unwove around you? Perhaps the most haunting question is this: would eternity feel closer? Without the comfort of night's endings, without the certainty of days that close, would life itself feel endless? Would you find that comforting or exhausting? Maybe that is what a world with two suns would truly teach us, that time is not fixed but fluid, that endings are not inevitable, and beginnings not always clear, that we live not in neat boxes of day and night, but in overlapping rhythms, as complex and layered as the light above us. And maybe, just maybe, that lesson would make us wiser, wouldn't it? If the heavens gave us not one sun but two, how would we worship the sky? Would humanity bow to both, building temples that faced east and west? Or would we choose a favorite, praising one while fearing the other? Think of the earliest humans, gazing upward with awe. One golden disk rising was already enough to inspire myths of gods and fire, of life and death. But two? Wouldn't that double the stories, double the mysteries? Perhaps one sun would be seen as the giver, the nurturer of crops, while the other would be cast as a destroyer, too harsh, too demanding. Or maybe they would be imagined as siblings, always in rivalry, always circling one another, shaping the fate of the world with their quarrels. Which do you think we would believe, that the suns loved each other, or that they competed for our devotion? Religions on earth have often sprung from cycles, light and dark, summer and winter, birth and death. With two suns, the cycles would tangle, irregular and strange. Would priests learn to read the crossings of their light, predicting moments when both blazed together, or when one dipped while the other lingered? Imagine festivals held at those rare crossings, whole cities gathering to sing under the double glow. Would such days feel sacred, as if heaven itself had spoken? And what about shadows? We've spoken of them before, how they split and multiply. Would people see them as signs, as messages from the divine? A farmer walking through the fields, two shadows trailing behind, might wonder, which one is my true self? Would philosophers argue over whether humans had two souls, one for each sun? Could whole doctrines rise from the shifting of light across the ground? Consider how architecture might change. On our earth, temples often align with the rising of the sun, catching its first light on certain days. But with two suns, architects would face a greater challenge. Would they design structures to align with both, creating halls where one beam pierced at dawn and another at dusk? Would cathedrals glow with twin shafts of fire, crossing like blades of light at the altar? Can you picture worshippers standing in that glow, trembling at the sight of two suns meeting in stone? And then there is the question of morality. Many faiths on earth draw on the contrast between light and darkness, good and evil. But what if the world never truly darkened? Would darkness lose its symbolic weight? Would evil no longer be thought of as shadow, but as imbalance between the suns, one overpowering the other? Perhaps righteousness would be seen as harmony, a balance of dual forces. Perhaps sin would be described as leaning too much toward one light, neglecting the other. Doesn't that feel possible, that belief itself would take on the language of balance instead of division? I wonder too about sacrifice. Ancient peoples often offered gifts to the sun, praying for harvests, rain, survival. With two suns, would offerings be doubled? Would some sacrifices be made to appease one sun's fury, others to coax the gentler light of the second? And what if they contradicted each other? One demanding fire, the other water. Would people feel torn, forever trying to please both masters? And how would myths of creation unfold? Perhaps one sun would be said to have birthed the earth, while the other gave it breath. Or maybe the two together would be imagined as cosmic parents, one father, one mother, spinning the planet between them like a child's toy. Would humanity think of itself as the child of light? Not just one light, but the union of two. Think of the night sky. On rare occasions, when both suns dipped below the horizon, the stars would blaze. Would that be the holiest time of all, when the hidden universe revealed itself? Priests might declare those hours sacred, urging people to pray under the brief, fragile dark. Imagine whole pilgrimages made to high mountains, where the double light faded faster, giving longer glimpses of the stars. Would those places become holy ground, touched not by suns but by the mystery beyond? And here is another question. What role would fear play? Light is comforting, but too much can be overwhelming. If both suns flared brightly, scorching crops, would people see it as divine wrath? Would they cower in caves, whispering that the gods were angry? Or would they build rituals to call for mercy, dances meant to cool the sky, chants to soften the fire? Could you picture children learning these songs, their voices lifted not in play, but in hope of easing the sun's fury? And yet not all faith is born of fear. Wonder also creates reverence. Imagine standing at dawn, both suns rising together, twin circles blazing in perfect harmony. Wouldn't your heart swell with awe? Wouldn't you feel small yet held, as though the universe itself were singing? Perhaps entire religions would grow not from dread, but from gratitude, seeing the twin lights as gifts beyond measure. Do you think humanity would divide itself, some praising one sun as supreme, others the second? Or would we find unity in duality, learning to honor both equally? History suggests both are possible. Rivalries might arise, wars fought over which star was true. But perhaps, just perhaps, the double sky would teach us humility, reminding us that no truth is ever single, no light ever alone. And what about prophecy? Priests might study the shifting paths of the suns, predicting moments of eclipse or convergence. Would people look to those moments as omens, shaping decisions of war and peace, harvest and famine? Imagine a king delaying a battle because the suns crossed strangely in the sky, or a marriage chosen because the shadows of the two lovers aligned perfectly at noon. Wouldn't faith and fate blur together, guided by celestial dance? Let's ask another question. What would prayer sound like beneath two suns? Would voices lift louder, as though to reach both at once? Or would prayers be whispered separately, one for each name spoken with care? Perhaps hymns would be written in pairs of verses, one rising for the first sun, the next answering for the second. Perhaps music itself would change, twin melodies weaving together, echoing the balance of the heavens. And then the personal. If you lived beneath such a sky, which sun would you love more? Would you favor the one that rose first, steady and reliable, or the one that lingered, gentle and patient? Would your prayers drift toward the brighter, or the subtler light? And if you lost faith in one, would you feel abandoned, or would you still feel held by the other? Perhaps that is the deepest question of all. Would two suns teach us division or wholeness? Would we learn to split our loyalty, or to hold both truths together in one heart? Faith has always been humanity's mirror, reflecting the sky we live under. With two suns above, our faith would be doubled, more complex, more tangled, perhaps more beautiful. It would remind us that nothing is singular, that every light has a companion, that every truth is part of a greater whole. So let me ask you, if you stood beneath two dawns and raised your eyes in prayer, would you pray to one sun or to both? And which answer feels more human? What kind of civilization would grow beneath two suns? Would cities stretch taller and brighter, built to mirror the brilliance above? Or would people burrow downward, carving sanctuaries into stone, seeking relief from the constant light? Think about how much of human culture has been shaped by the turning of day into night. Markets close, lamps are lit, and music drifts through streets in the dark. But what happens if the dark is rare, fleeting, almost mythical? Would we still divide our lives into day and night? Or would we invent entirely new words, new rhythms, new customs to fit a world without clear boundaries. Imagine walking through a city under two suns. Streets gleam as if painted in gold. Buildings glitter with glass and polished stone, every surface reflecting the brilliance above. People shade their eyes with veils or wide hats, their clothing dyed in shimmering colors that soften the glare. Would such cities feel alive, radiant, unstoppable, or exhausting, too bright, too loud, never offering a place to rest? And here is a question. How would governments adapt? On our Earth, many laws and customs grew from cycles of labor and rest. Factories close at night. Armies rest under the cover of darkness. Farmers rise with dawn. But under two suns, where rest is never guaranteed, could societies function in the same way? Or would they adopt a continuous rhythm, work flowing in shifts without pause, cities alive 24 hours, never silent? Would leaders encourage constant activity, seeking productivity? Or would they enforce periods of shadow, building artificial nights to protect their people's minds? Think about architecture again. Buildings might need thick walls and narrow windows not to keep out cold, but to keep out light. Public spaces might be shaded by vast canopies. Parks designed not for sunshine but for shade. Could entire cities be built underground, with mirrored shafts channeling just enough light to glow gently, while the harshness of two suns remains above? Would humanity, paradoxically, retreat into darkness even in a world of endless day? And what of politics? If one sun shone more brightly than the other, would nations divide themselves according to allegiance? Perhaps empires would rise claiming loyalty to the first sun, while rivals swore by the second. Could wars erupt not over land, but over which star held greater divinity, greater power? Or would alliances form, two nations mirroring the duality above, each honoring one sun but bound together in balance? Economics, too, would change. Energy has always been tied to the cycle of day and night. Fire, candles, electricity, all born to answer the dark. But in a world with two suns, what need for firelight, what need for lamps? Would technological progress slow, starved of necessity? Or would we innovate differently, creating machines not to banish the night, but to soften the day, cooling homes, filtering skies, weaving shade where nature no longer provides it? And agriculture, what would farmers do beneath such skies? Crops need cycles of light and rest. Without night, plants might struggle, overfed with endless brightness. Farmers might invent clever solutions. Cloth stretched over fields, shading crops like giant blankets, or rotating harvests to give plants time to recover. Could whole economies grow around the business of shade, with markets trading not in wheat and rice, but in fabric, stone, and would design to shield against the suns? Do you see how every part of civilization, government, economy, daily life would be reshaped? Would humanity thrive in this brilliance, or collapse under its weight? And what of war? On Earth, night has always given armies cover, a chance to move unseen. Under two suns, there would be no such cloak. Would warfare become constant, brutal, with no shadows to hide in, no rest for soldiers beneath the stars? Or would strategies change entirely? Battles fought not with stealth but with spectacle, armies dazzling their enemies with mirrors and light? Can you picture warriors carrying shields not just for defense, but for reflection, turning the suns into weapons? And then, identity itself. We define ourselves by our place in the world. Morning people, night owls, farmers of the dawn, sailors of the night seas. In a world where those roles blur, what would become of identity? Would people divide instead into sunfolk, loyal to the brighter star, and shadowfolk, cherishing the rare hours of darkness? Would those divisions harden into culture, into nations, into histories written in light and shade? I think often of art. Under two suns, what would artists create? Would they paint in glowing pigments, shimmering with metallic hues to match the sky? Would sculpture reflect the duality, figures carved with two faces, two shadows, two gazes turned skyward? Perhaps music itself would change, written in twin melodies that echo each other like the suns above. Wouldn't it be beautiful to hear songs woven of two threads, each echoing the balance of the heavens? And literature, how would stories be told? Heroes might not journey from night to day, but from one sun's rise to the other's setting. Love stories might speak not of moonlight, but of moments when the suns converged, painting the world in rare harmony. Tragedies might warn of imbalance, one sun eclipsing the other, plunging the world into chaos. Can you feel how the very structure of myth would shift, reflecting the double sky? Education, too, would change. Children would be taught not just to count days, but to read the dance of two suns, to understand the shifting patterns of shadow. Perhaps schools would be built around great sundials, their double shadows marking lessons, their strange movements teaching patience. Would children grow more attuned to subtlety, more aware of complexity, raised in a world where nothing is ever singular? And what about you? If you lived beneath two suns, would you seek the brilliance of the city, glowing without pause, alive in endless activity? Or would you seek the quiet sanctuaries, the caves and forests where shadows gather, places where your eyes could rest? Would you align with the builders of light, or with the keepers of shade? Civilization is always a mirror of its environment. On Earth, our nights and days shaped the rhythm of our lives. Under two suns, civilization itself would be redefined, not by absence of light but by its excess. Every choice, every custom, every law would grow from that brilliance. And yet, in the end, wouldn't we still be human? Still dreaming, still questioning, still telling stories of who we are beneath the endless sky. Perhaps that is the deepest truth. Two suns would not erase us, but reveal us. They would show how adaptable we are, how we find meaning even in chaos, how we build order even from overwhelming light. So I ask you, if humanity had grown beneath two suns, would we be wiser, more balanced, more attuned to complexity? Or would we be just as we are now, still struggling, still searching, still looking upward, wondering what it all means? And doesn't that question itself feel like civilization's story? No matter how many suns shine above, what would it mean to fall in love beneath two suns? Would affection feel brighter, doubled by the glow above? Or would it be harder to find intimacy in a world that never truly darkens? Think of how much love is tied to shadow. Candlelight dinners, moonlit walks, stolen moments in the quiet of night. Darkness gives us privacy, a place to whisper, a space for secrets. But what if that space rarely came? What if the suns lingered, always watching, always pouring light across the land? Would lovers still find ways to meet in hushed corners? Or would romance unfold in public, in the open brilliance of day? Imagine two people walking together at dusk. One sun dips, and they sigh with relief, thinking night is near. But the second hangs stubbornly, stretching twilight endlessly, bathing their faces in copper glow. Do they laugh at the delay, or do they groan, longing for shadows that never arrive? How different would love feel when privacy is so rare, when the glow of two suns turns every kiss into something seen, something shared with the world? And here is another thought. How would poetry change? On our Earth, love poems lean on the imagery of night, the stars, the moon, the quiet darkness. But under two suns, those symbols would fade. Instead, lovers might compare each other to shadows that linger despite the brightness, or to the rare moment when both suns set at once, gifting the world with true night. Wouldn't that be beautiful, to think of love as darkness itself, precious not because it is vast, but because it is rare? Consider jealousy. In a world where every person casts two shadows, might lovers speak of their second shadow as the part of themselves they keep hidden? Would suspicion grow from the metaphor, with whispers like, "I wonder what their second shadow hides"? Could the complexity of light give new shapes to human emotion, making love both richer and more tangled? And what about courtship rituals? On Earth, so many traditions are tied to cycles. Meeting at night, exchanging gifts under starlight, celebrating unions beneath the rising sun. With two suns, rituals might bloom differently. Imagine weddings timed for the moment when both suns rise together, a double dawn symbolizing harmony. Or picture marriages sealed at the rare instant when both suns set, a fleeting darkness marking the intimacy of two lives joining. Wouldn't that feel powerful, To root love itself in the crossing of stars? There is also the question of beauty. What qualities would shine beneath twin suns? Skin might glow differently, eyes might shimmer with reflected light, hair might gleam with metallic hues. Would beauty be judged not in dim candlelight, but in how one's face carries the brilliance of two skies? Perhaps entire traditions of fashion would grow around reflecting or softening the light, jewels designed to catch both suns, fabrics woven to glow in layered brilliance. Would lovers describe each other not as fair or dark, but as radiant with the hues of two heavens? And then intimacy itself. Without true night, would we crave it more fiercely? Perhaps lovers would build their own darkness, closing shutters, wrapping themselves in heavy cloth, creating caves of shadow in which they could breathe. Wouldn't that make intimacy feel sacred? Not just emotional but physical, a deliberate creation of night in a world that refuses it? But here is a softer question. Would love still need darkness at all? Could it adapt, blooming in daylight, finding romance not in secrecy but in openness? Lovers might walk openly hand in hand, their affection glowing under two suns, never ashamed, never hidden. Could a world without night teach us to love more boldly, to share our hearts without fear? I think of children in this world. A child watching their parents kiss, not under the quiet veil of stars, but in the brilliance of twin suns. Would love feel different to them? Not something mysterious and hidden, but something natural, always present, as constant as the light above? Would romance lose some of its secrecy, but gain a new honesty, a new strength? And what of heartbreak? On our earth, sorrow is often tied to night, to solitude, to the comfort of darkness. But under two suns, could heartbreak ever be private? Would grief itself be exposed, seen in the brightness of day? Would that make it harder, more painful, or easier, softened by the openness of a world where nothing hides? Here is another angle. How would families change? On Earth, we gather together at night, sharing meals, stories, laughter in the dark. Without night, would those rituals fade? Or would families invent new times of gathering, perhaps during the brief overlap when one sun sets and the other has not yet risen? Could love within families be shaped by the rare hours of shadow, cherished more because it is so fleeting? And what about loneliness? Would it feel sharper under endless light, when even solitude cannot hide in shadow? Or would the brightness comfort those who feel alone, reminding them that they are never fully in darkness? Would you, yourself, find such a world comforting or unbearable? Consider art again. Love stories might not end with happily ever after under the moon, but with imagery of suns aligning, shadows crossing, brilliance shared. Paintings might show lovers with double shadows stretching behind them, or with faces lit unevenly by two skies. Music might carry twin melodies, one soft, one fierce, echoing the dual nature of affection itself. Wouldn't it be fascinating to see how love shapes itself in art under such conditions? And what of philosophy? Could thinkers argue that true love is like the suns, two forces in balance, each pulling and shaping the other? Or might they warn that love, like twin stars, can collapse into chaos if harmony is lost? Would metaphors of light and duality fill the wisdom of the age, guiding couples not to dominance or submission, but to balance and reciprocity? There is one more question to linger on. Would two suns make us love more or less? Would the brilliance of constant light inspire us to see beauty everywhere, to feel gratitude for every bond? Or would the absence of mystery dull our passion, making love feel ordinary, always exposed, never private? Perhaps the truth is this. Love adapts, just as life adapts. Whether in shadow or in light, whether under one sun or two, love finds its language. It grows from what is given. It finds meaning in the environment and transforms it in turn. Under two suns, love would not vanish. It would shift, reshaping itself into something familiar yet strange, tender yet bold. So let me ask you, if you lived beneath twin suns, how would you love? Would you cling to shadows, treasuring the rare privacy they grant? Or would you embrace the light, letting your affection shine for all to see? And in that choice, what part of yourself would you discover? How would memory take shape in a world where the light never truly fades? Would we remember moments differently if they unfolded in endless brightness? Or would time blur, softened by the absence of night's natural punctuation? Think of your own memories. So many are tied to light and dark. Childhood afternoons, evenings with friends, nights when the stars burned overhead. Night gives memory a backdrop, a contrast that lets certain moments shine. But under two suns, with shadows always shifting but never deep, what would mark one day from another? Wouldn't they begin to bleed together, glowing with sameness, difficult to separate? Imagine a storyteller in such a world, sitting before a circle of children. Instead of saying, "It was a night long ago," they might begin, "It was during the time when the first sun dipped low, but the second still lingered." Would memory itself be catalogued not by days and nights, but by the movements of two suns, their patterns etched into the rhythms of story? And what about history? On our Earth, we divide time into years, decades, centuries, each measured by the orbit of a single sun. But with two, how would calendars be written? Perhaps one civilization would count by the cycles of the brighter sun, while another would use the subtler one. Imagine historians debating endlessly, their timelines overlapping but never quite matching. Would wars break out not only over land and power, but over how time itself should be remembered? Think of monuments. Ancient people built structures aligned with the rising or setting sun. But with two, what would they build? Would pyramids be carved with twin corridors, each catching the light of a different dawn? Would stone circles mark not just solstices but rare convergences of the suns, when their light crossed at perfect angles? Picture a temple glowing with two shafts of fire, one golden, one copper, filling its chambers with shifting brilliance. Would such a sight be remembered as divine, shaping myths that lasted for generations? And here is another thought. How would memory itself change in the human mind? Our brains rely on rhythm and rest. Sleep strengthens memory, sorting the day into stories we can keep. But in a world where darkness is rare and sleep uncertain, would memory falter? Would people remember less clearly, their lives blurred by endless light? Or would evolution adjust, sharpening our ability to hold memories even without the natural breaks of night? Wouldn't that be fascinating, to think of memory as something sculpted not only by our brains, but by the sky itself? Now consider collective memory, the way societies remember together. On Earth, festivals and holidays tie us to cycles of the sun and moon. With two suns, those festivals might grow more elaborate, marking the rare moments when light shifted dramatically. A story told during the only true night of the year would carry a weight no ordinary tale could match. Can you imagine the silence of such a gathering? Thousands of people gazing upward, stars revealed at last, every heart recording the memory like scripture? And yet, memory is not always reliable. Would myths of the suns themselves blur over time, one culture remembering them as siblings, another as rivals, another as guardians of different worlds? Would disagreements over memory fracture civilizations, or would they unite in curiosity, weaving their differing recollections into layered myths, richer for their contradictions? I wonder, too, about personal memory. Imagine recalling your wedding day, not as a bright afternoon, but as the day both suns set together for a moment, and the sky blushed violet. Wouldn't that anchor the memory more deeply, tied not only to your own experience but to the heavens themselves? Or picture a child remembering the death of a loved one, describing it not in terms of hours, but as when the second sun lingered alone, and the first did not rise. Could memories become cosmic in scale, each event bound to the dance of light above? And what about forgetting? Darkness, in some way, allows us to forget. Night erases the day, closes the curtain, gives us permission to begin again. Without it, would forgetting become harder? Would grief linger longer, illuminated by constant suns? Or would people invent their own rituals of forgetting, burning incense, closing heavy doors, creating darkness where the sky refuses it? Now think of writing. Our earliest words were often records of harvests, debts, histories tied to time. With two suns, writing itself might evolve differently, filled with symbols of dual light. Perhaps whole alphabets would twist into pairs, one letter representing the greater sun, the other its companion. Would stories be written not in straight lines, but in intertwining paths, reflecting the duality of memory itself? And what of music? On Earth, lullabies help children sleep, songs mark evenings by firelight. But under two suns, what would music become? Perhaps songs would be tied to the sun's crossings, melodies rising and falling as light shifted. Maybe entire symphonies would be composed to mimic the movement of twin shadows across stone. Wouldn't that make memory itself musical, remembered not in dates but in songs passed through generations? Here's another question. Would memory become more communal? Without darkness, without solitude, would memories be less private, always shared in the open brightness of day? Lovers' moments, children's play, grief and joy, all unfolding in the light. Would memories become collective property, carried not by individuals but by whole communities, each event witnessed by many? Would that deepen connection, or erase the intimacy of private memory? And then the stars. On rare nights when both suns set together, the universe beyond would be revealed. How powerful would those memories be? A child seeing the Milky Way for the first time, then waiting years before the chance returned. Wouldn't such scarcity make the stars unforgettable? Wouldn't they become the pillars of myth, the backbone of stories, treasured because they appeared so rarely? Perhaps memory itself would orbit those moments, lives measured by the number of times one had seen the full stars. Think of how identity would change. On Earth we say, I was born at night, or I am a morning person. But under two suns, people might define themselves by their alignment with light. One might say, I was born when the first sun alone lit the sky. Another, I was born in the overlap, when both shone at once. Wouldn't memory then become identity, the heavens weaving themselves into the story of who you are? And what of old age? Memory fades, becoming scattered and fragile. But in a world without nights, would elders cling more tightly to rituals of shadow, using them to anchor their fading thoughts? Could whole traditions grow around helping the old remember? Families gathering in rare darkness, telling stories aloud to keep them alive, binding memory to light and shadow? Let me ask you something personal. If you lived under two suns, how would you hold your memories? Would you write them down, fearing they would blur in endless light? Or would you trust the heavens themselves to mark them, tying your life to the dance of suns above? Which feels more comforting, to carry memory within your own mind, or to see it reflected in the sky each day? Perhaps the deeper truth is this: memory is not fixed. It bends with the world around it. On our Earth, night and day give it shape. Under two suns, memory would be stretched, woven into new forms, sometimes fragile, sometimes luminous. It would change, but it would endure, because remembering is what makes us human, no matter how many lights shine above. So I ask you, if you could choose, would you want to remember beneath one sun, or two? And would your memories feel brighter, or more fleeting, in such a world? Do dreams still bloom if darkness is taken away? Would your mind find ways to wander beneath endless suns, or would imagination falter without the deep silence of night? Consider how sleep feels here on Earth. The sun sets, shadows lengthen, and the body seems to sigh, surrendering to rest. Night enfolds us, and in that quiet shelter dreams take shape. Strange, vivid, sometimes frightening, sometimes tender. But in a world where night rarely comes, would dreams ever find the same refuge? Or would they shift, changing form to suit the brilliance of a sky that never yields? Imagine a child in such a world, lying in bed with light still pouring through the window. Their eyes close, but their mind struggles to believe it is time to rest. Do they fall into shallow dozes, snatches of dream slipping by like fragments of song? Or does their imagination grow more intense, forcing dreams to fight against light, becoming sharper, stranger, more urgent? What kind of dreams would such a child carry? On our earth, dreams are colored by shadow, by contrast. A dream of flying, of walking among stars, stands out because the night itself makes those images familiar. But beneath two suns, perhaps dreams would glow with fire and brilliance. Perhaps people would dream of shadow instead, longing for the cool embrace of darkness they so rarely see. Can you picture that, dreams of night in a world of endless day, the mind conjuring what the sky denies? And how would societies treat dreams in such a world? Here, we dismiss them often as fragments of thought, but we also treasure them for their mystery. Without night, would dreams become sacred? Would people wake and say, "I saw true darkness in my sleep," treating such visions as prophecy? Could dreams become the only place where night still lives, a hidden sanctuary carried in the mind? I wonder about art. Would paintings show shadowed forests and starlit skies, drawn not from waking life but from dreams? Would poetry speak of night as something rare, accessible only when eyes are closed? Perhaps stories would describe heroes who journeyed into dream worlds, where darkness stretched wide and stars burned forever. Wouldn't it be haunting to think of dreams as the only realm where night exists? But then, what of nightmares? Would they grow fiercer under endless light, shadows in the mind growing sharper because they have no place in the world outside? Imagine waking in a room bathed in double sunlight, still trembling from a vision of monsters in the dark. Would fear feel sharper, more alien because true darkness is so rare? Would nightmares be seen not as ordinary but as omens, warnings from the hidden side of the world? And here's another thought. How would love and intimacy find expression in dreams? On Earth, many of our most tender memories come wrapped in night. The glow of fireflies, the hush of moonlit walks. In a two-sun world, would those images survive only in dreams? Would lovers close their eyes and meet each other beneath imagined stars, their union tied not to waking but to the secret world of sleep? Could dreams become more important than reality, the place where people go to find what their sky denies? Let us think also of philosophy. Dreams have always invited questions. Are they messages, memories, shadows of other lives? With two suns in the sky, philosophers might argue that dreams are balance, the darkness of the soul balancing the brightness of the heavens. They might say that without dreams, people would burn away under the suns, their minds lost in endless brilliance. Wouldn't it make sense, then, to think of dreams as the shadow within us, the night that survives no matter how many suns rise? And how would science view it? Perhaps scholars would study dreams more carefully, seeking to understand how the mind rests without true night. They might discover new rhythms, new ways the brain weaves rest from fragments of shadow. Could they learn to guide dreams, to shape them, to give people the deep darkness their bodies crave? Imagine cities filled with dream houses, places where people go not just to sleep, but to dream more deeply, guided by science into shadow. And what of you? If you lived beneath two suns, would you long for dreams more fiercely? Would you keep a journal by your bed, writing every fragment before it slipped away, treating each dream as treasure? Or would you surrender to shallow rest, drifting lightly through sleep, less concerned with the mysteries of the mind? Think also of children again. How would lullabies change? On Earth, they speak of the moon, of stars, of night's embrace. In a two-sun world, perhaps they would speak of dreams directly. Close your eyes, find the shadow within, let the stars rise inside you. Wouldn't it be beautiful to imagine songs teaching children that dreams are their own night sky? Now picture the rare hours when both suns set at once. True darkness, brief and fragile. Imagine falling asleep in that rare moment. How deep would those dreams be? Would they feel sacred, unforgettable, carried for a lifetime as visions of perfect shadow? Wouldn't people plan their sleep for those hours, gathering in silence, waiting for the dark, then surrendering to dreams as though to a holy ritual? And then imagination itself. Dreams feed creativity. They blur lines, bend rules, open doors. Without night, would imagination falter or grow stronger? Perhaps creativity would bloom even brighter, fueled by the hunger for what the world withholds. Artists might draw not what they see, but what they dream. Writers might describe starry skies they have never known, inventing constellations born only in sleep. Could imagination become richer, precisely because it must build what reality denies? And yet, might there be a danger too? If dreams became the only place of night, would some people lose themselves in them, preferring the shadow world to the brilliance of day? Would philosophers warn of this, cautioning that one must not abandon reality for dreams? Or would mystics celebrate it, declaring that true life exists in sleep, where night still lives? Which would you believe? Think of memory again. Dreams help us process our days, weaving experience into story. Without night, would memory change? Would dreams carry more responsibility, working harder to give structure to a life without clear endings? Could they become longer, stranger, more symbolic, carrying the weight of time itself? Would people remember their dreams as vividly as waking events, blurring the line between the two? Here is a softer question. What would you dream of most in such a world? Stars? Shadows? Cool evenings by candlelight? Or would your dreams invent entirely new things? Colors unseen in waking life? Landscapes born of dual suns blended into something stranger? Perhaps dreams would become more alien, unbound from the rhythms we know, freed to wander because waking life is already so unfamiliar. And what of death? On Earth, we often describe death as sleep, as night, as rest. In a world of two suns, might death be spoken of as the great dream, the eternal shadow? Would people find comfort in imagining that death brings the night they never knew in life? Wouldn't that reshape how we think of mortality, not as an ending, but as a return to darkness long denied? So many questions bloom when we think of dreams beneath two suns. Each one leads to another, like pathways winding deeper into shadow. But maybe that is fitting. Dreams themselves are questions, questions we carry inside us, questions the sky cannot answer. Perhaps that is the quiet truth. No matter how many suns shine above, dreams will always create their own night. They will give us darkness when the heavens refuse it. They will give us stars when the sky hides them. They will remind us that within every mind, there is a cosmos waiting, vast and timeless, untouched by any sun. So let me ask you, if you could dream tonight beneath two suns, what would you choose? Would you dream of night as you once knew it? Or would you surrender to the strange brilliance of a world remade in sleep? And would you wake feeling comforted, or longing for more? What would death mean in a world where the light never truly leaves? Would it feel like stepping into shadow at last, a passage into the darkness denied by the sky? Or would it feel like being gathered into greater brilliance, folded into the glow of twin fires above? On our earth, death is often imagined as nightfall. The sun sets, the day closes, and we speak of souls moving into eternal sleep. But under two suns, where shadow is rare and darkness fleeting, would death carry a different image? Perhaps it would be described as the gift of night, the long silence the living never truly know. Wouldn't that change how we grieved, seeing loss not as an ending, but as release into the cool embrace of true darkness? Imagine a funeral in such a world, not beneath a setting sun, but beneath the overlap of two, their twin lights spilling across the mourners. Would people raise their eyes and speak of the departed as walking now between the suns, balanced forever in their glow? Or would they whisper that their loved one had finally reached the shadow, a place beyond light, where rest was whole and unbroken? Which feels more comforting to you, that the dead live in eternal light, or that they find the night the living cannot? Think of monuments to the dead. On our earth, gravestones often face east, waiting for dawn. But beneath two suns, which direction would they face? Perhaps they would be built in pairs, two pillars rising side by side, casting crossing shadows as a symbol of the soul. Picture vast cemeteries marked by twin stones, their lines etched with circles, their carvings filled with suns. Would such places feel sorrowful or radiant, shimmering beneath the sky? And what of memory? The living cling to memories of the dead, carrying them like lanterns through the dark. But in a world without much darkness, would grief feel sharper, more exposed? Would mourners long for shadows in which to weep, For night skies where sorrow could hide? Perhaps whole rituals would grow around creating artificial dark, curtains drawn, fires extinguished, silence kept, so that grief could find its proper space. Can you imagine families closing themselves into shadow, honoring the dead by making night with their own hands? Philosophies of death would shift too. If two suns rule the sky, might people believe the soul is divided at death, half drawn to one, half to the other? Could there be myths of afterlives beneath each sun? One a realm of brilliance, the other gentler, softer, a place of lingering twilight? Would priests argue over which fate awaited the departed? Or would they teach that balance was the goal, that a soul must learn to hold both suns within before it could move on? And then the fear of death. Would it change? On Earth, night often frightens us because it reminds us of endings, of unknowns. But in a world where night is rare, would fear shift toward longing instead? Would people yearn for the cool mystery of darkness, even in death, embracing it as a gift? Perhaps they would not fear dying at all, but welcome it as the moment when shadow finally comes, full and infinite. Doesn't that feel strange? To think of death as comfort, because life was too bright? What about legacy? We often imagine our deeds as lasting beyond us, shining like stars in the night sky. But under twin suns, where stars rarely appear, how would legacy be pictured? Perhaps people would think of their lives as twin shadows, cast long across time, overlapping with others. Or perhaps they would speak of their names as written in light, their stories forever part of the dance of the suns. Wouldn't that give history a different flavor, less about permanence in stone, more about being absorbed into radiance? And how would children understand loss? A child, watching both suns at once, might ask, "Which sun does grandmother live in now?" Can you picture the parent answering, pointing to the brighter star and saying, "There, she shines for us still," or to the dimmer one, saying, "She rests in that softer glow"? Wouldn't such answers soften grief, weaving it into the heavens? Let's imagine myths again. Perhaps one tale would say the first sun collects the spirits of warriors, fierce and unyielding, while the second gathers poets and dreamers, keeping their songs alive. Or another tale might say that when both suns set together, the souls of the dead walk free, joining the stars for one brief night. Can you feel how powerful that would be? Whole villages watching the sky in silence, believing their ancestors shimmered above for a fleeting moment, before the suns rose again and carried them away? And what of the body itself? Burial traditions might shift. Without the coolness of night, graves could feel exposed, too bright. People might place the dead deep underground, cloaking them in darkness. Or they might build soaring towers, raising bodies into the light, offering them to the suns. Which seems more fitting, returning the dead to shadow, or surrendering them to brilliance? There is also the question of eternity. Here, eternity is often pictured as endless light or endless night. But with two suns, might eternity be imagined differently? Perhaps it would be seen as a balance, a weaving of light and shadow, an endless crossing of suns. Death, then, would not be static but a continuation of the dance. Wouldn't that feel strangely hopeful? That nothing ends, but everything moves, orbiting forever between brilliance and darkness? And then grief again. Do you think grief would feel heavier in brightness, when tears cannot hide? Or would it feel lighter, carried by the suns themselves, softened by their glow? Would mourners feel less alone, standing beneath skies that never darken, as though the world itself refused to abandon them? Consider art once more. Death would inspire paintings of twin suns setting, shadows crossing, stars appearing briefly. Poetry might speak of loved ones as second shadows, following just out of sight. Music might rise in twin harmonies, one bright, one low, echoing the dual journey of the soul. Wouldn't culture itself reshape how we think of loss, making it less final, more woven into the endless rhythm of light? And what of you? If you stood at a graveside in such a world, would you look down into the earth or upward into the sky? Would you whisper to the suns, believing they carried the departed? Or close your eyes, seeking the darkness within, imagining your loved one resting there? Which vision would bring you comfort? Perhaps that is the quiet lesson of death beneath two suns. It cannot be erased, but it can be reimagined, can be softened, reshaped, given new metaphors. Instead of endings, it becomes balance. Instead of absence, it becomes transformation. So let me ask you, if you knew you would die beneath two suns, how would you live? Would you strive to shine brightly, leaving your light in the world? Or would you seek balance, carrying both suns within, ready to step into shadow when it finally arrives? And doesn't that question itself remind us what death has always been? Not a stranger, but a mirror, asking us how we want to live before we go. What does eternity mean when the heavens hold not one sun but two? Would infinity feel closer, as if time itself stretched across a brighter canvas? Or would the endless light remind us more sharply of our own limits, our brief lives passing beneath a sky that never tires? Look up and imagine it. Two stars circling, companions bound by gravity. Their dance older than any civilization, older than memory itself. What would it feel like to grow beneath such permanence? Would you feel small, fragile against their brilliance, or comforted, knowing you were always held within their gaze? On Earth, we measure eternity by cycles, the rising and setting sun, the turning of the seasons, the briefness of day balanced by the promise of night. But under two suns, cycles would twist. Days might stretch endlessly, seasons become erratic, rhythms blur. Would eternity then feel less like a circle and more like a river, flowing unpredictably, never quite repeating? And how would humanity understand survival in such a place? Our ancestors built shelters against the cold of night, fires to push back the dark. But under twin suns, survival would mean something else. Learning to shield from too much light, to cool the heat, to carve shadows where none are given. Wouldn't that shape us differently, making us builders of darkness instead of makers of fire? Imagine cities in such a world, not glowing with lamps, but with shade. Streets lined with canopies, houses wrapped in thick walls, towers angled to catch breezes and scatter sunlight. Wouldn't civilization itself be built as a balance to the sky, always seeking to temper its brilliance? And wouldn't that make survival itself an art, a careful dance with two suns, just as eternal as their orbit? Now think of stories. Humanity has always told tales of the heavens, of gods and stars, of beginnings and endings. What myths would grow beneath two suns? Perhaps one would be called the eternal, the other the wandering. Perhaps people would say the world began when they first met, their light weaving earth into being. Perhaps eternity itself would be imagined not as silence or shadow, but as the unending dance of those two fires. Which would you believe, that eternity is stillness, or that it is movement without end? And here is another thought. How would people think of hope? On our earth, night always gives the promise of dawn. But if dawn is constant, what replaces hope? Maybe it would become something else, the rare moment of true night, the glimpse of stars. Wouldn't that teach us to treasure what is scarce, to see eternity not in what never changes, but in what returns only briefly, fragile yet eternal in its repetition? Eternity is also tied to longing. Do you think people beneath two suns would long for night the way we long for light? Would their hearts ache for coolness, for mystery, for stars they rarely see? And would that longing shape their souls, giving them a deeper patience, a sharper awareness of what it means to desire? Perhaps eternity itself would be defined not by abundance, but by yearning, the endless search for balance, the reaching for what is just beyond reach. And what about love? Would love itself be shaped by eternity in such a sky? Perhaps lovers would speak of their bond not as everlasting, but as twin, comparing themselves to the suns. Two souls circling, bound by invisible gravity, lighting each other without end. Wouldn't that be a beautiful metaphor, to love as stars love? Not in stillness, but in motion, in an orbit that never breaks? Think too of death again. In such a world, might death be spoken of not as a final sleep, but as joining the suns themselves? Perhaps people would imagine their spirits rising into the sky, becoming part of the eternal dance, two lights welcoming them into brilliance. Or perhaps they would believe in shadow as eternity, the long darkness waiting after life spent in endless light. Which feels truer, that eternity is light without end, or darkness at last? And here is a humbler question. How would you live, knowing eternity burns above you every day? Would it inspire you to strive, to leave a mark that lasts beyond your years? Or would it teach you humility, reminding you that no life, no monument, no empire can outlast the sun's? Would you feel despair? Or would you feel peace, knowing you are part of something so much larger? Art, too, would wrestle with eternity. Painters might try to capture the sun's endless motion. Poets might describe time as a weaving of dual fires. Musicians might compose songs that never end, looping melodies echoing the orbit above. Can you imagine sitting in a hall, hearing a piece of music designed to last not for minutes but for hours, its notes repeating endlessly, mirroring the eternity of two suns? Would it soothe you or overwhelm you? And what of philosophy? Thinkers might ask, if the suns are eternal, what is the place of humanity? Are we meant to endure, or are we meant to burn briefly and fade? Would eternity be a comfort or a burden? A reminder of our insignificance or a call to rise toward greatness? Perhaps whole schools of thought would grow. One teaching that life is fleeting and should be savored. Another teaching that life must strive to mirror the suns, to last, to shine without ceasing. Which would you choose, to embrace briefness or to chase eternity? Now picture a child staring at the sky. They ask, will the suns ever go out? How would you answer? Would you tell them no, that the suns are eternal, a comfort that they will always shine? Or would you whisper the truth that even stars die, though not in a time we can imagine? Which answer would be kinder? Which would shape a stronger soul? And what of you? If you stood beneath two suns, how would you carry eternity in your heart? Would you look upward with awe, or downward with focus, grounding yourself in the briefness of your own life? Would eternity inspire you, or weigh on you? Perhaps the lesson of two suns is not that eternity is brighter, but that it is more complex. That life is not about choosing between light and shadow, but about holding both, weaving them together. That survival, love, memory, and death all take their shape from that balance. Eternity, then, is not far away. It is not hidden in the stars or waiting after death. It is here, now, in every moment lived beneath the dance of two suns. It is in the way light touches the ground, in the way shadows overlap, in the way hearts still dream of night. So let me leave you with this question. If you lived beneath a double sky, would you spend your days longing for what is absent, or would you find eternity in what is already given? And isn't that, after all, the question of every life, no matter how many suns shine above?